Everybody have a chance to look at the agenda on the computer? Very good. Everybody okay with the consent agenda? I move that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Very good. So, anybody want to speak, Danielle? No? Greg, your turn.
Yes.
Thank you for the cookies, by the way.
You're welcome. Congratulations. Well, that was quick getting to my part on the agenda. I didn't expect it would arrive that quickly, but I handed out a updated financing analysis. And I thought it might be helpful to walk you through where we're at in terms of interest rates and updated calculations on your successful bond election. And as I started pulling together information for the meeting this evening, is this on?
Not sure.
Read that. Is that better?
That's
okay,
better.
Great. As I started pulling together information for the meeting this evening, I was looking back to our early calculations and some of the preliminary analyses we shared with you over the summer as you were getting ready to call the bond election, and then information we shared with the community in regards to the bond election campaign. And it was interesting at some of the key points that went into that original financing plan included the 41% state aid. We had used an average interest rate of 4.3%. We had a 25-year repayment of the bond issue. We had a mill levy, projected mill levy that would be stable throughout the life of the bond issue at 21.5 mils, which represented an increase of about 11.6 mils from your current levy. And obviously we tried to be fairly close in terms of interest rates, but uncertain as to what would happen to interest rates as you got closer to selling the bonds and after the election. And so we were a little bit conservative on interest rate, but not a lot. And what has happened since then is we've watched interest rates continue to come down in recent weeks. And as of last Friday, we set a all-time record low for tax-exempt interest rates on municipal bonds, as evidenced by that bond buyer index that I shared with you before. It's interesting that we broke the record low set on Friday, broke the record low that was set in August, which broke the record low that was set in February, but then going back before that, that record low had held since the mid-1960s. So we've been in a low interest rate environment throughout 2012, some fluctuation throughout the year, but where we stand today is that we're at that new all-time record low. And you'll see that reflected in our calculations and the interest rates, and it puts you in a very favorable position in terms of selling the bonds. And the other factor that we had discussed with you when we were calling the election and shared the importance of this program with you is that state aid program. And 41% state aid is a very important factor in keeping the mill levy lower. And that is something that we would not want to lose. And we've continued to monitor discussion in Topeka. Right now, there is not any proposed legislation for this upcoming session that would eliminate that, but it's probably too early to tell whether that will be advanced or not. I think our fear is that it was advanced this last legislative session, did not pass, but may be considered again. And again, that's just speculation on our part. It's something that we have a concern about, and we'd be watching closely for you. So if you don't mind, I'll walk you through the analysis that we brought this evening, and if you'll turn to that black book that I've shared with you. The first page inside of the cover page is the interest rate graph. I believe this analysis should be the same analysis that was shared with you in your board docs packet as well. The interest rate graph, again, you'll notice it shows that decline in interest rates that we've had over a 25-year period, where we're currently in a position where rates have been higher 100% of the time since 1987, and again, we've been carrying that back further to the mid-1960s. I know we shared that graph with you before, and but you might like seeing then if you'll turn to tab 1, and walk you through our updated calculations on the bond issue. And as we were working to update our calculations and thinking about the goals of this plan of finance for the district and what would be important to us and what we think would be important to you, some of the items that really stood out on our end for being in a position to lock in favorable interest rates is obviously important. Putting the district in a position where you preserve the ability to receive that 41% state aid for the life of the issue is very important. But then also maximizing the funds available for construction. And the more dollars that we can put into the project construction fund and maximize the amount of the $73 million that's going towards construction as opposed to financing costs will help you deal with any change orders or cost overruns or additional items that you might want to include in the project. So we'll show you a plan where we're maximizing the amount of project funds available. But then also, if we're able to generate through the sale of the bonds a reoffering premium that allows us to make an initial cash contribution into your Code 62 bond and interest fund, that gives you that much more flexibility to hold the mill levy down. And I think we're in a position where we can accomplish that as well. And with that reoffering premium going into the bond and interest fund and lower interest rates, putting the district in a position where you can, at a minimum, maintain that 21.5 mils for the life of the issue, but also put you in a position where you might be able to set that mill levy lower than what was represented during the bond election campaign. I know when we worked with you on the prior bond election, that was important, and we're very pleased with the results of that issue and being able to set the mill levy at 14.2 mils or lower, and it's come down to the 9 mil range. But now we view it as equally as important to make sure that we put you in a position where you can be at or below that 21.5 mils as you finalize this bond issue. And then, as you may recall, it was about this time last year we helped you with the refinancing of the bond issue. And as interest rates have come down, and if you've been considering this bond election, we've been looking at the remaining portion of that 2005A bond issue that was not refinanced previously to see if there's any opportunity to capture a savings on refinancing those 2005A bonds that are still outstanding while you would be going through the process of selling the new bonds. And I think there is an opportunity to capture a small savings on that issue as well. So if you'll turn to the first set of numbers behind tab 1, this is the page labeled sources and uses of funds. This is where we break down the funds that would be available to the district or proceeds from the sale of the bonds, and then how those dollars would be allocated or spent. And you'll notice we have 3 columns in that report. The total column shows the combination of both the refinancing portion and the new money portion. The new money portion is the amount of bonds that were authorized by voters at the recent election, the $73 million. And then the refinancing portion is about $5.8 million. And I'll walk you through the savings that would occur as a result of that refinancing portion. But then you'll notice, in addition to the $73 million, there's a sizable reoffering premium. And in the current interest rate environment, and I'll show you a pricing summary that will give you some additional detail as to the calculations regarding the interest rates that are set and the price at which the bonds are sold. Our goal is to structure the bonds in a manner that we deliver the lowest yield or rate of return to the investors, which then translates to a lower borrowing cost for the district. In the current interest rate environment, we're actually able to obtain a lower reoffering yield to those investors if we structure the bonds where the investor pays in a premium to the district. So the stated rate will be slightly higher than the yield or return to the investor, and in exchange, that investor will pay a premium to the district. So in other words, the investor may pay 102% of the principal amount of the bonds, and it's that additional premium that is paid into the district that becomes very important in regards to managing that mill levy, and maximizing the funds available for construction. So if you look down below, the uses of funds where we have project fund, here you have $73 million in bonds that were authorized by the voters. Oftentimes we'll have financing costs that cut into that and reduce the amount that you actually have available for construction. Here with that reoffering premium, we're able to use that to first cover all of the financing costs, then second, maximize the amount going into the project fund. And so you'd have a full $73 million going into the project fund, and then we actually would have some money left over. And that reoffering premium may move around slightly as interest rates would be finalized, but we expect that it's going to, at a minimum, cover financing costs, maximize the amount going into the project fund, and then we should have a sizable amount that we're able to use as that initial deposit into the bond and interest fund. And it's that initial cash balance, or growing that cash balance in the bond and interest fund, that will be very helpful for the district in terms of stabilizing the mill levy and putting you in a position that if you should have some surprise regarding assessed valuation or loss of a major taxpayer, it doesn't immediately result in an increase in that mill levy. So you can see there on the uses of funds, we have $73 million going into the project fund, about $6.3 million going into the escrow fund, and that refinances the portion of the 2005A bonds that I had referenced. Then below that, the cost of issuance and underwriter's discount, those are the costs associated with completing the financing or the cost associated with selling the bonds. And so all of those costs would be paid for out of the proceeds of the issue, and primarily the premium from the bond issue. And then the bottom line item there, we would have about $4.5 million going into the bond and interest fund. Again, it may not be quite that large, but we would hope that we could generate a $2 to $4 million premium that, to where we have a net amount out of that premium of about $2 to $4 million going into your bond and interest fund for that starting balance. The next page, and actually the next two pages, show some detail as to what I referenced earlier about some bonds being sold at a premium and some bonds being sold at a slight discount. And this is where we would be working with our municipal bond trading desk. Each year of the bond issue, the principal amount that would be sold to investors, where do we set the stated interest rate on the bond issue, which is shown under the column third from the left, titled Rate. Where do we set the stated rate on the bond issue that drives the lowest yield or return to the investor, which is shown then in the yield column, and what dollar price does that translate into? And so, for example, if you look at the year 2024 and 2025, you'll see one year we have a slight premium, the other year we have a slight discount. Any of the years where the dollar price is above 100%, those are the years where we would have a premium paid in. And then in a few of the years, we actually have a dollar price slightly below 100%. Those are the years that we're offering at a discount, we believe helps in terms of lowering the overall borrowing cost for the district. So the yields or rate of return to the investors, when you look at all of those different years, ranges from 1.02% in the first year of principal payment, which would be 2016, to 3.93% in the final year, which would be 2038, or the 25th year. And it's the combination of those interest rates that gives us an average borrowing cost of 3.87, which again compares very favorably to the interest rate we used calling the bond election of 4.3%. So you can see we're down about 0.43% in terms of the average interest rate compared to when we called the election to where we're at right now. If you turn back to the following pages, there's one labeled Bond Debt Service. It's actually on the following page there. This shows more of a summary. It shows the annual payments. Interest would be paid semi-annually. Bond principal would be paid once per year on on September 1st of each year, same as your current bond issues are set up. And we would have principal payments going out through the 25th year. We actually, you'll notice there's a few years where we have smaller amounts of principal, and what we're doing there is trying to structure the new bonds around your outstanding bonds to where we can maintain that stable mill levy throughout the life of the issue. The following page, this is where we break out just that refinancing portion that I had mentioned to you, the refinancing of the 2005 bonds that have not been refinanced before and are still outstanding. It would consist of the years through 2019, and we have a total savings of about $194,000. You'll notice there's a few years where we have loss or negative brackets, and that's intentional because what we're looking at is, as we're refinancing the 2005 A bonds, we want to make sure that your payment schedule coupled with that initial deposit into the bond and interest fund, that we're putting you in a position where we don't have any year where we have a jump in a payment or a larger payment that may put pressure on that mill levy. So to a certain extent, the refinancing of the 2005 A bonds, it allows for a minor restructuring, which helps us layer in the new bonds and maintain that mill levy. But at the same time, we are locking in a savings of about $194,000. If we look at just the refinancing portion and not the entire issue, those bonds that are being refinanced have an average interest rate of about 4.64%, and the new interest rate on just that refinancing portion would be about 1.6%. So again, dropping from 4.6 down to 1.6 interest rate. Refinancing is a relatively short repayment schedule, and that's why that portion has a lower interest rate than the overall issue. And again, our view is that while we're going through this process of issuing new bonds, adding in that refinancing is fairly simple to do, and it helps us in terms of mill levy management and a small savings for the district as well. But with that, if you'll turn to the mill levy impact analysis in your handout, that's behind tab 2, or is shown on the screen. And here you probably quickly look to the far right column and make sure we're holding at that 21.5 mils, and that is the scenario we're showing. But when I look at this analysis, one of the things that I look at as well is not just the mill levy that we're showing, but I also look at the fund balance that we have in that bond and interest fund, because that tells me, do we have any years where we're very lean on that fund balance, where there might be pressure on the mill levy, or do we have an adequate balance in that debt service fund to where we might be able to set that mill levy at a lower level? And when I look at this, I do believe that the district may be in a position to set that mill levy lower than what was represented to voters during the campaign. Obviously, we'll be able to give you some more precise calculations in terms of what that may look like once the bonds are sold and we have the interest rates locked in. And here I do believe that we're using a growth rate that's, for your assessed valuation, that's lower than what you've experienced in many of the prior years. And obviously, we've held the mill levy, or the assessed valuation, stable for the last few years, but we're hoping that you get back to a position where you start to grow again. And over the last 10 years, you've averaged a growth rate of about 6.95%. We're using something well below that, and I think having the fund balance there, if you do have a year where low growth or you see some setback in assessed valuation, you've got that cushion in the bond and interest fund that will help you hold the mill levy at 21.5 mils. We're also assuming that the 41% state aid, and we're not showing any growth in that 41%, but I do believe over the last 10 years your state aid has grown from 35% to 41%. We're not counting on any future increases in that, but we are showing that it would hold at that 41% level. So with that, I know that's a lot of information in the numbers, but I would summarize the updated financing analysis by saying it's better from really all perspectives. We have a lower interest rate, We've got more flexibility in terms of setting that mill levy. I think it's good news from the district perspective that you're not tight in terms of maintaining that 21.5 mill levy, and may actually have an opportunity to, as you're setting the mill levy down the road, come in below that in some of the future years. As you may recall, when we talked about calling the bond election, we also shared a calendar with you that showed the process for selling the bonds. I didn't bring a copy of that this evening, but the steps from the board perspective would be, first step, to give us permission to work with the bond attorney, prepare all of the documentation for the bond issue, prepare the preliminary official statement, which is the offering memorandum shared with bond investors, and put us in a position then where we could go ahead and have a pre-offering of the bonds to establish the final interest rates, and then bring back to you a proposed set of final interest rates for your consideration. That would be the second step from the board perspective. And if those interest rates are acceptable, then you would adopt the bond resolution. The bond resolution would be the binding action on part of the board that would lock in the final interest rates, lock in the final amounts and all of the terms and details associated with the bond issue, and then put us in a position where 2 or 3 weeks after that, it's simply a closing process on our end to take care of some of the paperwork. And by the end of the year, if you should decide to move ahead, we would have the bond proceeds delivered to the district, and you could deposit those in the project construction fund. And we would help you identify options for investment of those bond proceeds. But the calendar that we had prepared initially, should you decide to move forward with the issue, was to consider adoption of that authorizing resolution as the first step. And then we would work on finalizing that documentation, locking in interest rates. If we were to start that process this evening, it would be the latter part of November at the earliest before we could lock in the final interest rates. And then bring back to you at the December 10th board meeting, assuming that that would be your next scheduled board meeting, the final results for your consideration, and have that bond resolution prepared. That time frame, if we were to have the bond resolution considered on December 10th, we would expect to have a closing somewhere around December 20th. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, or if there are other areas that you'd like for me to address, I'd be glad to do that as well.
Any questions for Greg? I'm sure glad we have people like you.
Well, thank you.
Greg, would you lead the board through the resolutions you need this evening?
Sure. The first step would, I believe in your board package, you have a copy of the authorizing resolution, and that's that first step that I'd referenced. It's not the authorizing resolution is not binding on the part of the board. Just simply put, it gives us permission to continue working on the issue and push towards being in a position where we could bring those final interest rates back to you. And so the action that you would take this evening, if you were to want to move ahead and consider that resolution, would be to make a motion adopting the resolution that authorizes Piper Jaffray and Gilmore and Bell to move forward with the preparation of the documents related to the refinancing and the sale of the bonds, which will then be brought back to the district at a later date.
Any questions? I move that we adopt the authorizing resolution to allow Piper Jaffray to proceed with the refinancing portion and preparation of documents for the sale of bonds for our recent bond issue.
We need Gilmore and Bell.
Yeah,
And your partners.
Yeah, right. Yes, that's fine. That covers it.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Very good.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg.
Congratulations again.
Thank you. I move that we amend our agenda to allow Mr. Long, who is at 7.2, to follow Greg so he can have the rest of his evening. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
For
regret that I don't have cookies.
That's good.
We have cookies.
My name is Jim Long. I'm with Long CPAs, and my friend came out and did the audit for the June 30th, 12 fiscal year. And we look past that loose page as far as the independent auditor's report. It's a clean opinion. There's no problems or exceptions noted. These financial statements are in compliance with the Kansas Municipal Audit Guide. The federal compliance testing revealed no problems either. That's what the second page would look like as far as saying everything's good to go. If you take a look at page 3, this is an overview of last year, and down the left-hand side are the funds. The first column is the beginning balances of each of those funds at July 1 of 11. The receipts and disbursements for all the funds and the ending balances. Up there at the top is negative cash for the general fund. That's because the state doesn't want to give you their money until July, so that amount came through July 7th. Same way with the supplemental general, not near as big of money. And then down in the lower right-hand corner, shows you where that money's kept. Quite a bit in CDs with a large interest rate, I'm sure. Some of the checking account balances are there as well. So it seemed like balances kind of held their own year over year. The next page. This statement shows the budgeted amounts for each of the funds and compares that to the expenditures for all the funds. And what's important on this one is the top line as far as the general fund goes. That 0 right there, that means everything's been either used or transferred to another fund to be used in the future. No money's going back to the state, and that's a good thing. And also the 0 in the supplemental general fund, that means everything's been spent for that as well, or transferred to other funds. All the other budgets are being held in accordance with provision. Next, page 5. This begins several pages of budget and actual comparisons between all the funds. Actual is the first column, budget's the second. For the general fund there, again, the important thing is the balance at the right-hand column for the expenditures is 0. That means everything was either spent or transferred to other funds. Several pages beyond that are basically all funds. You can flip through there and see each of the particulars. The third line from the bottom shows whether that fund went up or down in cash balance. But again, there's no problems. For instance, on page 11, the capital outlay. Since that's a tax levy fund, you can see the taxes collected up at the top. Some transfer in, some expenditures out. But down at the bottom, you can see the balance in the fund as of June 30. Page 18, that's the bond and interest fund. Again, taxes collected. Debt service paid is what it was supposed to be. And the cash balance down at the bottom, since you had a big discussion about the bond and interest fund. Page 19 starts several funds that are non-budgeted. So each column is a separate fund. Textbook rental fund is there. Contingency is in the middle of that page. Several of the next columns are federal funds. Matter of fact, I deleted a couple of pages because there were no federal funds. So funds this time around. Page 21. Some money is held out at the schools, and this is where those monies are documented. Again, on the left-hand side, the high school is listed as far as activity funds. Each particular organization has a balance listed with it, beginning cash balance, the ins and the out disbursements, and the ending balance. Kind of gives you an idea of how much money flows through each of those particular.
Executive session, item 8.2, I move that we accept the resignation of Aaron Weekus.
Second.
Any discussion or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Very good. 8.3, appointments. Claudia? I move that we appoint Mr. Fenton as the high school bowling coach.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I guess that was supplemental positions, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm out of order, okay. 8.5, early graduations, I move that we accept the list as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Good. Out-of-district students, 8.6.
Move that we accept the out-of-district students as presented.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Good. 8.7, substitute teacher list.
I move that we approve the substitute teacher list as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? I just have one question. Can we make that list longer? Are there more available substitutes to put on that list for availability?
None on standby, but we're always open to more coming.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any other reports or things we need to know about, Randy?
Claudia will be representing the board very soon at KASB convention, and and what information I get, I'll send to all of you so you can have an idea what she voted on, and when she gives that report, when she gets back.
Wait a minute, you didn't tell me about it.
At least you'll kind of know what they're talking about, and so that's all the news I have.
Great. Next board meeting is December 10th. Is that correct? All right. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Good. Thank you all for coming.
Funds at those sites. Page 22 is a continuation of that for the middle school. Page 23 is the district activity funds. So some amounts of monies are held out at the site, but they are more district related as opposed to organizational type, and that's where these are listed. You can see the beginning cash balances, how much came in there. Disbursement, how much was at the end of any balance. Notes to the financial statements are narrative description of policies and procedures. On page 30, note 5. Compliance with Kansas statutes. We noted no violations of Kansas statutes. On page 31, on note 7 there, kind of shows that a lot of money goes into the general fund. I've mentioned that several of those amounts were transferred out to other funds. This shows how much it went into the general or supplemental general, and which funds it went to. On page 33, we record the July money in June when it's supposed to, and the prior July money in June when it's supposed to. It looks like this. And if you scroll down just a little bit further, you'll see that expenditures are still matching up with the budget, and the cash balance is 0. And the state likes that. And the next page is the supplemental general fund. It's got a little bit more value back here because those monies, again, are posted in the correct periods. Page 35. I enjoy a challenge, and putting the debt together was a challenge. So here we go. Down the left-hand side are the general obligation bonds in the upper left corner there. Interest rates, date of issue, amount of the issues. And the balance at the end of the year is a second to the end. The interest paid for all the particulars are listed there as well. The lower section is the principal for each of the next 5 years and the 5-year segments after that for each of the particular debts. And then the lower section is the interest component for each of those years. Next couple of reports are federal compliance reports. There's no problems or exceptions in any of those reporting items either. Internal controls were okay. Compliance matters, we tested some food service activity, so I want to make sure that all those were in accordance with the federal guidelines. And on page 40 is the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And what's missing from that is ARRA money, because they didn't give you any more of that. Other couple pages are schedule of findings and question cost. No findings or question costs noted. Notes to the schedule of awards. Again, no problems or exceptions in there either. Lease page at the front. A letter from me to you guys. Used to be pretty quick and easy to say everything was okay, but now it takes 3 pages. So if you flip to the second one up at the top, difficulties encountered in performing the audit. There's no significant difficulties. Everything we asked for was available, and here when we came by and got everything we needed. No problems in obtaining information and doing the testing that we needed to give our opinion on the financial statements. Which then leads to the third page up at the top as far as any additional items that might be noted. No items of significance to mention. That's the quick tour. If you have any questions, you can call or in the hall.
Any questions? I'm glad we have people like you too.
Even without cookies, huh?
Even without cookies.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. Item 5, maintenance report and...
Need a motion to accept the audit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you make a motion?
Jim, we're doing a motion to accept the audit too, just so you know.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I make a motion to accept the audit as presented. Second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Very good. Sorry about that.
No.
All right, item 5, maintenance report and technology report. Any questions for Randy on those? Those are kind of informational. Curriculum and instruction, any question for our administrators on the administrative reports they submitted? All righty. Dan, you are up.
Good evening. Here tonight to talk about our building report cards as reported by Kansas State Department of Education on our state assessment scores from last year. What we gave you in the packet is pretty much raw numbers, and I hope to explain some of the asterisks, some of the numbers, some of those other pieces, kind of where we were last year through this presentation. So on the slide up on the screen where we have our reading. Our target goals did not change from last year. That was actually through the waiver that the State Department asked for to hold those numbers the same. So those were actually the same on the 2010-2011 school year. This is our Lansing School District overview for reading. Notice that our scores, 92.9 in the all students. And then please note, like at the free and reduced and under the students with disabilities and our African American students, that on the far right side where it says met criteria, that says that if you met adequate yearly progress or not. And what that asterisks mean, reading from what the state provides us, is it's the percent standard or above is below the target score. So you notice that it's 86.0, and you notice that those three scores are all below 86.0, but we still met the criteria because it's below the target but above the criterion percent when the hypothesis test at a 99% level of confidence is applied. So what that means is if you're close, they will not, you don't have to make 86.0, you have to be close to 86.0. So in our case, it's not 2 or 3 kids that if they would have made it, we would have made AYP. They have that confidence interval statistically for you to still be able to make it. It's your significance or your margin of error in their calculation. So if we go on to mathematics, this is the only place that the district did not make adequate yearly progress. And that was, if you remember from last year, you have subgroups, your all students, and then your subgroups, and a subgroup is any group that is 30 or above. And you notice that we did not make adequate yearly progress under the mathematics because of our free and reduced subgroup, and we were at 73.8. Last year, and the reason that there are some other things that we'll talk about in the middle there was safe harbor, and safe harbor was made when we get into the schools, because I think it makes a little bit more sense. But in our free and reduced last year, we were at 74.8. And so we did not make growth in that subgroup. And that is why, more or less, that the safe harbor did not apply for us last year. Think of safe harbor. What are you looking for in a storm? You're looking for a safe harbor. It's another way that if you aren't just sailing right through, for you to be okay. And we did not make safe harbor. If you look at the students with disabilities, where it says that we did make safe harbor, the reason that we made safe harbor is because last year our number that were standard or above was 66%. And so we went from 66% to 69.2%, so we had growth in that area, and so that is why we made safe harbor. And then you look over to the side where Dr. Bagley has highlighted a 6,
Yeah.
and we have a yes with a 6, and that means that the group made safe harbor through the hypothesis test at 75% level of confidence. So we had enough growth of students that went a standard or above in that subgroup in order to make safe harbor. That's what the yes with the 6 means. The yes with the asterisk, once again, is a 99% confidence interval. Some of the other numbers there that I think that are important to mention for the school district is our African American students were 71.4 last year, and we went to 75.6. We had a 4% growth there. Our Hispanic students, 78.4, and we went to 83.2. So there is growth. It just wasn't in one subgroup, once again, for the school district. We'll go on to the high school. One thing that's nice for the high school, you notice that we don't have near as many subgroups for our high school students, and that is because we only test one grade at the high school. All of the other buildings that you'll see are an aggregate for example, 6th, 7th, and 8th in that building, or the 3, 4, 5 for the elementary. Something to note under that one is our free and reduced. Notice that we have a yes with an asterisk and a 2. And so the 2 actually, sorry, I do have to refer to my notes on that, is percent standard or above is below the target, but above the criterion percent when a hypothesis tested. 99% level of confidence is applied. And this year's participation rate was below 95%, but the average across 2 years was at or above. So that is something else that we have to notice. That all of our participation rates, you have to make sure that those are above 95%, or you'll never make safe harbor. More or less, you don't get to pick and choose which students we give the test to in this case. We go on to the high school under mathematics. In the all students, last year was 89.3, and we raised that to 94.2, which I think is very good growth for us when you start to jump. The other thing that I think you really need to give kudos to the high school math curriculum folks is they made AYP in an area that many, many, many schools do not make AYP, and that is the mathematics test at the high school. And I think that really, we need to really give them applause for that. It's not easy having a math degree and remembering that many, many days that math was a struggle for many students, and I really think we need to applaud them for that. We move on to the Lansing Middle School. Our target is 87.8%, and you see that well above 90 across the board at our middle school, and that, I would say, is a testament to our teaming model at the middle school and all of the work that they do with all of the students that come in. African American students last year, for example, were at 90%, getting close to that 87.8. They jumped to 97.4%. And I mention that because just as easy as it is sometimes to raise at 7%, you can drop 7% just as fast when you have a subgroup of 38 students. So that's one mental note to make for yourself as we move on through. We move on to mathematics. And this is where the middle school has two subgroups that did not meet AYP this year in mathematics. And that is because our free and reduced numbers went from 81.4% to 76.7%. And our students with disabilities went from 79.1 to 76.3. So we were below the percentage of 86.7. And we were also, we did not show growth. And that is why the middle school did not make safe harbor, because we did not have that growth as we did at the district level in some of those subgroups. Likewise, in the elementary school, our reading target of 87.8, and you see that we have two not met criteria there, and we went from 81.8 to a 75.8 in free and reduced. Once again, subgroup that is not entirely large. You have quite a few students of 153, but it's still that 6-point drop is not a lot of kids, but it's still a 6-point drop. And our students with disabilities went from 75.3 to 72.3. I would like to note, though, that under the African American students, we went from 69.4 to 72.2, and so that percent actually raised, which is a good thing in our elementary school. The other thing that I think is worth noting is that last year the elementary school was on improvement because of their mathematics scores and not because of their reading scores. And so sometimes you focus a lot of your efforts on one subject, and sometimes you forget that there's a whole lot of other things that need to happen also. And so that is one thing that as we talk about MTSS and we talk about some of the other things that we have going in the district to keep in mind. It's also a good note for us to remember sometimes that just because, don't take for granted that you worked really hard to get to where you're at on the things that you did really good at. And you can never really forget that. If we move on to mathematics, and like I said, we were on improvement last year in math, and you notice that they've made AYP in mathematics this year. And that was with growth across all subgroups, but the multiracial subgroup. And that was the all students moving from 79.5 to 81.8. The free and reduced moving from 67.1 to 68.6. Students with disabilities, 56.8 to 62.7. African American students from 63.9 to 66.7. 9% growth, or 8.9% growth in the Hispanic students. We're at 67.4 and we moved to 76. And then 81.9 to 83.8. So we had good growth, and a lot of that focus, I think, paid off for us in the mathematics area. But as I said, sometimes, so you have a lot of time spent there, and you see good gains. But then you saw that dip sometimes in the reading because of that same thing. District level initiatives. One, we continue, and you've heard a lot of reports on MTSS across all of the buildings. And I think that that's where you start to see our subgroups and that growth that we're making in those subgroups pay off with the multi-tiered system of support. I think that we still have a lot of work to do on that. We are pretty much in year 2 across the board in implementation, and you really start to see growth and gains after that 3rd year and 4th year and 5th year, where you no longer, it's not a change, it's now something that you do, it's ingrained into your being, and I think that you'll really start to see that. The other thing is curriculum alignment, and I believe you'll be hearing a report on that in the coming months. Interbuilding and work on transition in grades. We talk a lot about that in our Professional Development Council, and making sure that we don't lose anything when we move buildings and when we move from 3rd grade to 4th grade to 5th grade. Elementary schools spend a lot of time on the professional learning communities and making sure that those are working well. Also, middle school has had PLCs now for many years, and I think that's why you see those scores continue to stay high. We also sent high school teachers to PLC training this last summer, so we continue to do that. One thing that you'll hear a lot coming up is Common Core training and curriculum alignment. These tests are going away, as we know. Everyone at the state will say that if you're really focusing on these test scores, that you're about 2.5 years behind. I still get to stand up and report these, but it's not what we need to be focusing on. As Mr. Dyke said at a conference last week in Wichita, we can't exactly tell you what the tests are going to look like. So what you need to do is focus on instruction, because instruction won't change. You're still going to instruct students. And so I think that's something that we really need to think about in our district also. The other piece, as Ms. Schroeder shared with me today, we have a co-teaching initiative where we have 39 co-teachers as a service delivery model in our district. We have 39 teachers participating. You heard about that last month. I think that as we continue with that, you'll also see our scores in our special education area continue to rise as those students are receiving all of the instruction that they need. The last part, that's a safe harbor piece that I threw in just to make sure. Before we get to questions, I think it's also important that you hear, even though sometimes you don't make AYP, there's, as Carrie and Steve and Vicki all presented to you earlier on, is that we still made the building standard of excellence. Building-wide at the high school, building-wide at the middle school in reading, building-wide in mathematics, building-wide in science at the middle school, building-wide in history and government at the middle school. And so you should be asking yourself, how can that happen? You don't make AYP, but you're still a building standard of excellence. And building standard of excellence is only based on your all students category. And so that's why I remember having questions about what do we do for the large masses of kids. And we continue to educate them very well in Lansing. You see that with the building standard of excellence. Where we continue to focus there, we also need and continue to focus on our subgroups. Not specifically, we aren't picking children out because of the subgroups they're in and giving them extra help. We do that through our MTSS process for all of our students that need that extra help. I think that's important to hear to end before I have some questions, because we continue to do a good job with educating students. Now we can go to the question side. Dr. Baker.
Anybody have any questions for Dan?
Run. Is that what that is? That way? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. All righty. Nothing on board policy?
Actually, I put that on there to let you know that the board policy book has approved, and I think it was September. We did a little bit of bookmarking on it, shredded the forms from it. The forms reside with the clerk of the board. And so if you see a difference in the one that's online, that's the big difference in page numbers, is that somebody needs a form, they go to the clerk of the board to get that form. And that it is on the website and it's widely viewed, hopefully, by the public. And the other thing that I do with public documents, and this is an information item, is I do password them to prevent copy, paste, printing, and so forth. We can always print those for people, but I'm very protective of what's online so that it can't be changed, altered, or taken out of some kind of context or whatever. So just an information item, let you know it's on the website, and entertain any questions about that if you have any.
Any questions for Randy about the board policy book? All righty. I move that we enter executive session for 40 minutes to discuss issues regarding non-elected personnel, matters affecting students, financial data, and attorney consultations.
Second.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Very good. Executive session, item 8.2, I move that we accept the resignation of Aaron Weekus.
Second.
Any discussion or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Very good. 8.3, appointments. Claudia? I move that we appoint Mr. Fenton as the high school bowling coach.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? I guess that was supplemental positions, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm out of order, okay. 8.5, early graduations, I move that we accept the list as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Good. Out of district students, 8.6.
Move that we accept the out-of-district students as presented.
Second.
Any discussion or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Good. 8.7, substitute teacher list. Any discussion? I just have one question. Can we make that list longer? Are there more available substitutes to put on that list for availability?
None on standby, but we're always open to more coming.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Any other reports or things we need to know about, Randy?
Claudia will be representing the board very soon at KASB convention, and and what information I get, I'll send to all of you so you can have an idea what she voted on, and when she gives that report, when she gets back.
Wait a minute, you didn't tell me about
At least you'll kind of know what they're talking about, and so that's all the news I have.
Great. Next board meeting is December 10th. Is that correct? All right. I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Good. Thank you all for coming.